Joe, 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 Joe. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. This is Marcy Mowry with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. Thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn. Today we have Dave Gantz with us. Dave is with Dutchware Gear. Dave, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about hammocking. If you've spent any time in our state parks and state forest, you probably have seen people hanging out, either using it for on the day use areas or maybe even camping overnight in a hammock. So today we're super excited to talk to you to learn a little bit more about hammocking, and let's just launch right into it. What is hammock camping?
Sure. So thank you, Marcy. I'm happy to be here. Hammock camping is the idea of having a bed with you wherever you go. So as you can imagine, as long as you have trees or sturdy vertical structures to hang your hammock, you can take a nap. You can just relax. You can sleep overnight if you'd like. So yeah, hammock camping is basically getting yourself off of the ground, which some people are concerned, obviously, with the little creepy crawly insects crawling on them when they're on the ground. As many of us know, in Pennsylvania, sometimes the ground is rocky. And most importantly, oftentimes the ground is not necessarily flat, so you can't get comfortable. So with hammock camping, you can do all of those things very easily.
Oftentimes when I think of hammocks, I think about hanging sort of like this, and that doesn't necessarily sound like a good night's sleep to me, but I'm thinking probably when you're seeing this, maybe people aren't laying on it properly.
Correct. Yes. So that is probably out of the two most difficult things about hammock camping, or just being in a hammock. That's probably one of them. You have a couple types of hammocks, right? So if you think about it, a hammock is essentially a rectangular piece of fabric. A gathered end hammock, on each of those ends of the rectangle, the fabric is gathered up, right? So those are the hammocks that look like kind of a banana. Mm-hmm. If your hammock is short, or if you just aren't familiar with how to do this properly, you're going to lay, parallel to that hammock, and you are all going to feel like banana, right? And that doesn't sound comfortable, and it's not. Well, generally what happens there in the hammock world, they call it calf ridge. You get pain behind your knees or in your calf muscles.
Okay.
So the trick is to get a large hammock. So, and there's a certain point where too much of a hammock is too big, but generally like an 11-foot hammock and a wide hammock. So long and wide. And then you turn your body diagonally. In the hammock world, they call this, if you like to have your head on the side of the hammock, you'll say head left. So your shoulder is at the edge, feet right, because your feet are on the opposite corner on the right side of the hammock. So in the hammock world, be like, hey, how do you lay? And you'll say, oh, head left, feet right, or head right, feet left. So yeah, we have a nice image here trying to show that diagonal, because it's kind of hard to describe. But what happens is there is a sweet spot in the hammock, and it's slightly different every time you hang your hammock, but a sweet spot where you can really lay flat and you feel like you're in this really super comfortable bed.
Nice. You mentioned that laying in it properly was one of two common mistakes. So that brings to mind, what is the second most common mistake?
Second one is how much sag you have in that hammock, right? And that goes along with what I talked about with calf ridge as well. So, your hammock is attached to trees, usually with straps that come down, and then it attaches to that gathered end. All kinds of ways to do that. But what happens is if you make those straps too tight and your hammock doesn't have enough sag, you'll get another, like, again, ridge. You'll get strict lines in the middle of the hammock. So you can't get diagonal. On the flip side, if you have too much sag, then you kind of feel like there's too much, there's almost like walls above you. Personally, I would say it's a little claustrophobic feeling. So there's a very fine line with how to get the correct hang setup. We have some images that we put together with the help of PPFF, and there's all kinds of resources out there. One of the best ones is called The Ultimate Hang. It is a book, but there's also a website. And in that website, they have a free hammock hang calculator.
Interesting.
And basically, you enter all the variables of your hammock and your setup. How far away are the trees? How high did you put the straps on the trees? And then it will tell you your optimum setup. It's really cool. The other trick to do this is if you have a ridge line on your hammock. So a ridge line, again, think about these two gathered ends. The ridge line goes in between the gathered ends.
Okay.
And it is set at exactly 83% of the length of the hammock. And that is the optimum length, so you get that perfect sag. It's sort of like a little bit of a cheat. So when you hang your hammock, if that ridge line is droopy and not taut, then you know you need to tighten your suspension. If you hang your hammock and that ridge line is way too tight, like a guitar string, then you know you need to loosen your suspension.
Okay.
So lots of hammocks don't come with ridge lines, but if you can get that option, it's super helpful until you get comfortable for how the hammock should feel.
So there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you're hanging your hammock and when you're laying on your hammock. One of the things that I was seeing there on the chart too is, the distance between the trees. So can you talk a little bit about what is the optimum distance? And if I can build on that question, and if you're hanging on trees, what are some other things that you need to think about?
Sure. So the gathered end hammocks that we're talking about, and I'll step back a second. There's another kind of main category of hammocks. They're called bridge hammocks. Maybe it was just because I was a kid in the 90s, but I feel like they were popular in the 90s. You would see like a wooden bar on each end rather than the gathered end. They're called spreader bars. There are also camping hammocks that have spreader bars that are really light, like tent poles. The idea with the bridge hammocks is you can lay flat with those. The ones that have the wooden bars, you can imagine, we've probably all done it. You lay in it and immediately flip over and face first on the ground. Right?
That's what I was thinking as soon as I saw that picture.
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of neat when you think about it. The reason for that is because you're top heavy, because all of the weight is at the very top of that hammock. You're not in a sag. You're not below it. In today's world, and some of the not some, but all of the camping bridge hammocks, and you can kind of see in this image, it's sort of like you're in a pocket, right? So it's designed with a pocket. So you get that flat lay without having to be diagonal and without having all that extra fabric, but you're still not really top heavy and you don't flip over.
Yeah, because that would keep me up at night. We were talking a little bit before we went live about things that would keep us up at night. That would definitely keep me up if I was hammock camping, the fear of waking up on the ground.
Exactly. Yes. It's not fun. So with that said, with those two types, when we talk about how to best hang the suspension, there is a little bit of difference between those two types of hammocks. But generally speaking, with the gathered end hammocks, you want a 20 degree angle of the straps coming down. Sorry, a 30 degree angle of the straps coming down from the trees. With the bridge hammock, it's 20 degrees. And again, this is like, nuances, but it can make a difference. And that's where we always say the hard thing about hammock camping is all the variables. And the fun thing about hammock camping is all the variables. So every time, especially if you're out in a state park or in a forest, every time you hang up your hammock, it's going to be slightly different because the trees aren't going to be the same. So where you start is you need to find 2 trees roughly 12 to 16 feet apart, right? So I'm pretty short. So if you can imagine you're trying to get a 30-degree angle from the tree down to your hammock, and you need to be able to get into your hammock. It can't be too high up, right? So the further away your trees are, the higher you have to hang your tree straps. So someone might like me who isn't super tall, I need the trees to be a little bit closer because I can't get the straps high enough on the tree. Now, if 7 feet tall and reach 7.5 feet up into a tree, they might be able to have trees that are really far apart, and with that sag, they can still get in their hammock. But the main thing is generally trees 12 to 16 feet apart. We can talk about safety with all those. That's very important in a little bit. But to get that perfect hang, like I said, on a 30-degree angle, and what you can do, generally, the trick is like you make an L with your forefinger and your thumb, and the strap should come down this way, and that is the 30-degree angle that's coming down from the tree.
That's handy.
Right? So yeah, again, kind of rough. There's actually cool little levels that are made and sold that gives you that 30-degree angle, so you can hang it from your tree straps, and it will tell you what angle you're at. But again, that's the really good starting point. That's what you want, and then you, from a variety of manners, you attach that strap to your gathered end of your hammock. Some things that are popular are carabiners, and they want to be climbing rated carabiners because they're holding your body. You can loose out a really strong rope and things like that, but anything you can get to attach the strap to your hammock. And then, like I said earlier, you want to make sure that you can then get in your hammock. So you don't want it to be too tall that you can't physically get into it. And also you don't want it to be so low that you hit the ground when you sit in it. Not only is that uncomfortable, it kind of takes away the whole point of being in a hammock, but it can be really hard on that fabric. Because if you think about it, you're looking at a fabric that's breathable. So it's not a water fabric that's designed to go on rocks. It's the air, especially on a day like today, air comes underneath you and really cools you off. So it is not made to really interact with rocks and blueberry bushes, thorns, and all that kind of stuff.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, and I made myself a note to ask you another question in a little bit. But you talked about the straps around the tree, and I want to talk a little bit about that because sometimes I've seen people using really thin rope, which is cutting into the tree. And if you cut too far into a tree, you can cut through the layers, and basically you're hurting the tree. You're girdling it. And I've also seen people hanging hammocks on trees that aren't necessarily stable trees. So can you talk a little bit about, hanging so that you have minimal impact on the tree, but you still can have a quality experience, and you're protecting your own safety as well?
Definitely. So 1-inch wide straps is minimum for the trees. And that 1 inch is totally fine to a whole person as well. Generally, you want polyester straps. There's all kinds of variety of straps, but the nylon straps, if anybody's familiar with nylon and polyester, nylon tends to sort of stretch out when under pressure and wet. So polyester straps, other that kind of popular for folks who want to reuse things are seatbelt straps. Now you're going to want to buy with someone. Don't just cut up your seatbelt. 1-inch wide straps is a minimum. 2-inch wide straps are great. I don't believe it's Pennsylvania. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but some states, I think Texas is one of them, are now requiring 2-inch straps at certain parks and forests and things like that. But 1 inch is good. So make sure you do that. There is, as Marcy said, there is rope and other materials that are thinner than that can hold a person's weight, but it's really, really bad for the trees. The other thing, as you said, again, just as you should do every time you go camping, anytime you take a break, if you're hiking, basically anytime you stop moving when you're in the woods, first thing you do is look up above you. You don't obviously want to be under a hanging tree or a dead branch. So those traditionally have been called widow makers. You also don't want to set up your straps on a tree that looks like it's dead. Again, not only is that bad for the tree, but it could fall on you and it could be really bad for you. Even a tree that's unhealthy looking, you should really not use that at all. 6-inch diameter is bare minimum for a tree. Again, I'm throwing out a lot of numbers. An easy way to do it, if you can push the tree and it moves, don't use that tree. The tree should be a really strong, healthy, stable tree with no dead branches above you. The other thing I would say, because I did mention earlier, hey, you don't have to worry about any, creepy crawly bugs. It's happened a few times to some folks I know. Check for ants. And generally this would probably be on trees that are dead anyway. But if you put your trees around, your straps around a tree, like right where there's a whole bunch of ants and maybe a little ant nest, they can go marching down your tree straps and they can spend the night with you in your hammock, which is just really creepy because you think you're away from that. So it's kind of a funny thing when you think about it, but when it happens to you in the middle of the night, it's not that funny if they're the red biting ants. But yeah, again, really check your trees, check your space. Again, the most important thing is that your webbing strap is at least 1 inch wide.
Great, thank you. This brings to mind that we're at PPFF, we constantly advocate for leave no trace principles, leaving as little impact on the natural world as possible when you're visiting. So is there any other considerations a person who's looking to hammock camp or just to hammock and hang around? Is there any other considerations from a leave no trace perspective that they should be thinking about?
Yes. So the other thing to consider is, one of the best things about hammocking is you can hammock anywhere, right? You can be on a side of a hill where a person with a tent can't set up. And as long as you have good, healthy trees, you can hang there. One thing to consider is your impact just walking around the woods and making a new campsite. So again, with leave no trace, if possible, even though you could hammock camp anywhere, it's best practice to hammock camp in a spot that is already a well-used campsite. And then if you do need to make your own site, make it well off the trail so other people aren't going to follow you. We're not trying to make new campsites when we're out in the forests. The other thing, again, with that said, is you are going to have an impact on that underbrush. Even if you don't have a tent on the underbrush, you're going to be walking around your hammock. So again, try to use spaces that have already been impacted rather than impacting new spaces. The other thing to consider, as you said earlier, Marcy, there is a chance you're going to fall, right? Accidents happen. So for both the safety of yourself, other people, and the forest, check under your hammock. If there's a really sharp rock, it might not be the best place to camp. People have done things in the past where they will camp in between two trees and they're basically overhanging a pond or a lake. That's a pretty rude awakening if you fall out in the middle of the night. The other thing I would say, which doesn't happen too often, again, it's always, I feel like it's best intentions and you might just not realize, don't set up your hammock across a trail. Especially in the state parks, don't set up your hammock where it's in the middle of a disc golf course. Try to look around and be considerate of others. Are other people going to want to use this space where I'm taking a nap right now? Things like that. And again, it's considerate of both, so people don't have to walk off trail or go down you, but also being aware that animals use our hiking trails as well. And you don't want a bear to run into you in the middle of the night because they have really bad eyes. You don't want them to bump into you in the night as you're hanging above the trail.
Yeah, and even I'm thinking as you're mentioning trails and wildlife using our trails, keeping an eye to make sure that you're not on a wildlife trail, because sometimes you can tell that it's a corridor that, one of our natural friends might use. So you don't want to be hanging up on a deer trail so that, you're an obstacle for them.
It's a great point. Yep.
Yeah. Hammock camping seems to have really grown in popularity over the past couple of years. What are some of the factors that have contributed to this?
Well, like I said earlier, it's really fun because you can tinker with all this kind of gear. So for folks who are tinkerers, which it seems like, especially in the backpacking world, camping world, lots of folks are tinkerers. You can get all kinds of different gear. You can have a different setup every time you go out. It's never boring, I guess is my point. The other thing is that you can, like we said earlier, you can sleep anywhere. In addition to that, you can have a tarp and a hammock. Right now it's bug season in Pennsylvania, so you also want a bug net, but you can go out in the fall or early when the bugs aren't out, and you can just leave your bug net at home. If you really, really are confident that it's not going to rain today at a state park, it's not going to rain at least for a couple hours, right? Maybe later with the storm, you don't need a tarp. The other thing with that is your backpack, you really don't need poles. And tent poles are kind of annoyance backpacking. They're heavy and they take up a lot of space. And again, you don't need that with a tarp and a hammock.
Right. And for me, I haven't hammocked camped, but I do like to use my hammock when I'm camping. And the hammock, to me, it automatically triggers relaxation. It's almost like a stimulus and a response. Oh, I'm getting into my hammock. I'm going to relax, because that's what the hammock is for. In my opinion, it's why I hang it. It's just to relax and chill out and watch the trees.
That's a great point. Yeah, you don't feel like you're hiding in the woods and you're hiding in a shelter, protecting yourself. You're just sort of enjoying a relaxation. Yes.
Yes. So, you've mentioned various components of a hammock, and you mentioned that there are multiple types of hammocks. And you also mentioned that, you have to be careful when you're hanging your hammock, because you can erode the fiber. So can you speak a little bit to care of a hammock if somebody has one, or there are some routine things that they want to do in order to ensure that it remains safe? Are there some things you want to make sure you do or avoid in order to increase the life expectancy of the hammock?
Sure. So the hammock fabric is really a factor. There's all kinds of hammock fabrics out. There are hammock fabrics that hold only 150 pounds, and they are super ultra light, right? There are hammock fabrics that hold up to 500 pounds. So you want to make sure you're aware of your body type and what the fabric can hold. As we said, you really don't want to compromise that fabric in any way either. So you'll see plenty of pictures of dogs in hammocks. It's not really suggested. Take your shoes off, any keys in your pocket. Take those out, any sharp objects. Again, this thing is holding your body. So you can imagine getting a little rip in your shirt and how that can grow really quickly if you're on a knob. If you have your entire body weight and there's a little rip in your hammock fabric, that can blow out pretty quickly. So really consider that. And then the next thing is with your tree straps. If there's any climbers out there, I think you'd really appreciate this. Climbers really inventory their gear after every use. And a lot of climbers even keep a journal of their gear, so their rope. Again, these tree straps are holding your body weight. So sure, they will probably last 3 or 4 years. But if you put them away wet in a damp area, it could dry rot, right? So just like any of your other camping gear, you want to make sure it's really clean and, most importantly, really, really dry, that every part of it is dry before you pack it away. Best practice, again, most of these materials are made out of nylon for the hammock fabrics. So as if you would wash any of your other hiking gear. We say hand wash, it's the best practice, but generally you can put it in a very gentle cycle, mild detergent. Biggest thing is making sure it's rinsed off and really making sure it's dry. The other thing, like we mentioned before, for the most comfort is to make sure your hammock is big enough that you can get in that diagonal position. The shorter hammocks are really nice if you want to sit in it, kind of like at a right angle, and watch your kids swim in the lake, But if you want to lay down and take a nap, you want a big, long hammock.
Yeah. Yeah, which doesn't always seem intuitive. So that's good advice. When you talk about storing your hammock, there's always been two schools of philosophies with like tents. There are those who stuff, and there are those who fold. So when it comes to storing your hammock, do you stuff it back into a sack? Do you fold it, or do you leave it hanging up somewhere so that it's not crunched up? What's the best way to store your hammock?
So I'm pretty crazy about my gear, so I might go a little overboard, but I keep my gear in those really large Tupperware bins. They're cubes. I don't even know how big they are. But I lightly lay my things in there. I don't fold them or stuff them. I keep them as open as I can. My sleeping bags, I hang on my walls so that they're open. But yeah, your hammocks, the main thing is letting them get some space so they don't, you don't have to fold them. Your tarps should be open as well. You don't want them stuffed, compressed. Basically with your tarps in that, you can get creases in the fabric, which can kind of lose your waterproof right there. If you have creases there, if it's 6 months until you use it again, that could be an issue.
Yeah, nothing like waking up to a drip, drip, drip on the middle of your forehead.
Correct.
So you talked a little bit about a couple of some gear that you could have with your hammock. So you have your hammock, you mentioned your tarp, you mentioned a bug net. Is there any other type of gear that somebody can acquire to accessorize their hammock or to improve the seasonality of the hammock, or to improve their camping experience if they're using it as their camping lodging?
There is more gear out there for hammocks than you would like to know.
Okay.
One thing that's really, really popular, or one type of gear, I should say, is, as we mentioned, lots of hammocks have a ridge line. There are all kinds of things that you can attach to your ridge line, right? So a peak shelf, for instance, you can put your cell phone, your headlamp. That'd be a great place for your car keys. You can hang those things so they're within reach, but they're not on your hammock fabric and they don't get lost or pinched under you, things like that. The other really, really popular thing for, if you're going out in colder seasons, are underquilts. So yeah, really neat. Again, right now it's 90 some degrees outside. You want all the air that you can get touching your body when you're out in the woods.
Right.
So a hammock provides that experience. But when it's cold outside, you can use a sleeping bag or a quilt over you like you would when you're sleeping on the ground, but the bottom of your body is still open to all this cold air. So with your sleeping bag, it gets compressed on your hammock body, right?
Right.
So hammock underquilts are actually super cool. You set them up off of your hammock suspension, and it is a sleeping bag that hangs independently underneath of your hammock.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. They have shock cord around the hemline, so you can pull it tight so it gets really tight on the edges of your hammock. But again, it's independently hanging underneath your hammock so that insulation never gets compressed and it keeps you super warm.
Nice. That sounds great.
The craziest thing I've heard was -20 degrees. Someone was sleeping out negative 20 degrees with all kinds, basically they're just in like a cocoon of sleeping bags and underquilts. Lots of folks will start out with a sleeping pad because that really gets the trick done as well. But what happens is that sleeping pad will sort of move around on you at night.
Right.
So it's a really good place to start. Those closed cell foam sleeping pads are relatively inexpensive, usually less than $50. If you're going to go out once on a cold fall evening, that will get you by. But when you really start to get into going in cold weather hammock camping, you want to get an underquilt. It's just basically, it's kind of like if you go hammock camping in the winter, you need 2 sleeping bags rather than 1, if you think about it that way.
Yeah, which is still probably lighter than carrying a 4-season tent.
Yes, it's pretty light. It really is.
Yeah. Now, I remember earlier this year, you and I were chatting and you were heading out. It wasn't a hammock rendezvous, but it was some gathering of people
Yes.
who like to hammock. So can you talk a little bit about that? It sounded like a lot of fun.
So these are called hammock hang events. It's really neat. They used to be at Caledonia State Park, and I'm blanking right now. What's the other state park in Michelle? Pine Grove Furnace.
Pine Grove, yes.
Right. So I'm not sure if that's happening this fall or not, but they happen all over the place, and it's basically, hammock groups. I guess you'd call it organizations, not necessarily nonprofit organizations, but just groups and organizations of folks who get together on weekends and they camp out. It's generally like you and all of your best friends car camping with your hammock gear for 2 nights on the weekends. We have on Dutchware's website, we have a page that has a calendar and a list of events for all these. And we encourage folks to email us to tell us when they're hosting their event, because the really cool thing about these, if you haven't gone hammock camping yet, is it's similar to like a car show. Everyone sets up all their hammocks and they're doing it to show off. So if you don't know much about hammocks, you can go to this event and you can say, hey, Marcy, do you want to tell me about your hammock setup and can I check it out real quick? And Marcy will talk your ear off for hours about how her setup is the coolest thing ever, and she'll tell you why. So yeah, they're called hammock hang events. Really, really neat. They happen all over the place. Again, the hard part, which is why we have this webpage, the hard part is finding them. Lots of this is on social media, Facebook groups, things like that. But we try to make this page so folks can kind of have it one common spot where everyone can find out where their local hang event is. The one thing I would say in addition is, like I said, it's kind of like car camping. Lots of those events have special things going on. Like they'll do like a cook-off or like who can make the best dessert kind of thing. All kinds of fun, pretty low key, laid back events.
Nice. And that sounds like such a great idea, being able to talk to people, because there's so many different varieties and being somebody like you said, test driving, people allow you to try it or to learn about it, which brings me to my next question. If somebody's thinking about buying a hammock, what should they consider? What are some things they should think about? Because there are a lot of options. There are options on your website. There's options on other websites. What should they think about? It can be an investment, so you want to make a wise decision.
It sure can, yes. Again, I would really look into the size of the hammock and what you want to do with it. Again, if you want to sit in your hammock and just kind of hang out for a few hours, you can get a shorter, smaller hammock. If you really want to fall asleep, you need that 11-foot, usually for most folks, 11 feet or longer. Some folks, if you're like shorter than 5'6", you can get away with like a 10 and a half foot hammock. Wider hammocks. So this is kind of a neat concept. If you are, so at Dutchware, we make 11-foot hammocks. And then we make wide hammocks that are 13 inches wider than standard. So because you're trying to get on that diagonal, that width allows a longer body to be comfortable.
Yes.
So we say 11-foot wide or even a 12-foot wide hammock is really good for folks who are taller than 6 feet tall. Generally, like 6'1" is right around that. Like, do I need a standard width 11-foot or do I need a wide? So the big thing is your body type. And then lots of folks also want to go in hammock with their partner, right? So you want two people laying in a hammock. Anyone who's done can tell you it doesn't matter the size of the hammock. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world. I kind of attribute it to like a water bed, right? Like you're just sinking in the middle on each other. So again, if you want to do that, you need to book that a couple hours. But if you really want to sleep at night, you need generally two separate hammocks. There are all kinds of, again, like I said, there's all kinds of gear. There are ways with certain hammocks that you can attach two hammocks together and have one bug net over both, all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But again, to get started, a big hammock is really nice. The only downside to a big hammock, like I said earlier, is sometimes you get extra fabric. If your hammock is too big for you, it just sort of flaps around in the wind. Or it kind of, you lose your sight vision because you get a little bit of wall up beside you. That's the main thing is, making sure the hammock fits you and it will hold your weight, and that the tree straps are at 1 inch wide.
Great. Very good advice. I'm just checking. I had a couple of questions written down. I just want to look. I think I've asked all of them. Is there anything that you would like to add? I mean, you're giving us very good information and very thorough information. And do you feel like that there's something that we missed that might be essential for people to know?
The one thing I would add is that, like I said earlier, the really cool thing is all the variations. But the downside to all those variations, it's really easy to get lost on websites and discussions and forums, anything on the internet that has to do with hammocks. It's really hard to get lost. So expect that, enjoy the ride, don't get frustrated by it. Try to keep it simple, because I think just Dutchware, I think we sell 5 different types of straps, and that's different fabric straps. That's not the different lengths, the different variations within those straps. We have 4 or 5 different types of fabric, along with 7 or 8 different types of hammocks. So again, you can really get lost. This is just, any company does this, just because there are so many ways to set up a hammock. So I would just say, again, enjoy the ride, enjoy learning. It's a fun learning experience. And when you set up your hammock for the first time, lay in it for a little while and then change your suspension just to see the difference. Just play with it. Again, that's the fun of it. You might find you like a sway that someone else doesn't like. But the whole thing is really just enjoying your time, relaxing, and tinkering with it to find what really makes you comfortable.
Yeah, I think you make a good point earlier as well. You mentioned that, every experience is going to be a little bit different because your trees aren't going to be exactly the same. So bearing that in mind, that, you are going to tinker maybe every time. You can't just mark on your hammock, this is the way things should go, because you can't recreate nature every place where you camp.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
One of the best resources is YouTube videos for fun learning for hammocks. All kinds out there who have all kinds of do-it-yourself setups, and they love to share. So that's a really good place to look.
Right. Excellent. And then I'm thinking, I love this, the 30 degrees, and I'm thinking you look up 30 degrees and
there you go.
Tree, so
that's nice. Yeah, great.
So great. Well, thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate you joining us. Pam has flashed up your website a couple of times, as well as the resources that you have there. The how to hang hammocks are available in both English and Spanish. So that's a great resource for people as well. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you very much. I had a blast.
Yeah, this is wonderful. We're talking about hammocks as part of Latino Conservation Week. And we have a lot of activities scheduled yet tomorrow. So if you haven't made any plans yet for tomorrow, check out the calendar of events for places you can go. Maybe grab your hammock and apply what you learned today in hanging it. Or think about maybe your next camping experience. Maybe you want to hammock camp. So again, thank you, everybody. Be safe this weekend. It's going to be super hot. Remember to stay hydrated, avoid being in the sun for extended period of times. And if you need to go inside, just be safe because the heat index is going to be very high. Great. Thank you, Dave. If you can hang around after PM goes off air, it'd be great to chat with you for a few